Hello, everybody. The first creature I have chosen to go over in this series is the elf. An elf is a type of humanoid supernatural being that originated in Germanic folklore. Elves appear especially in northern Germanic mythology, being mentioned in the Icelandic Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. In medieval Germanic speaking cultures, elves were thought of as beings with magical powers and supernatural beauty, ambivalent towards everyday people and capable of either helping or hindering them. Beliefs vary considerably over time and space and flourished in both pre Christian and Christian cultures. The word elf is found throughout the Germanic languages. It seems originally to have meant white being, however, reconstructing the early concept depends largely on texts written by Christians in Old and Middle English. Medieval German and Norse. In Old Norse, these associate elves variously with the gods of Norse mythology, with causing illness, with magic, and with beauty and seduction. After the medieval period, the word elf became less common throughout the Germanic languages, losing out to terms like Zwerg, which means dwarf in German, and Huldra, which means hidden being in Northern Germanic languages, and to loan out to words like fairy borrowed from French. Still, belief in elves persisted in the early modern period, particularly in Scotland and Scandinavia, where elves were thought of as magically powerful people living usually invisibly alongside humans in their communities. They continued to be associated with causing illness and other threats. For example, several early modern ballads in the British Isles and Scandinavia, originating in the medieval period, describe elves attempting to seduce or abduct human characters. With modern urbanization and industrialization, belief in elves declined rapidly, though Iceland has some claim to continued popular belief. Elves started to be prominent in the literature and the art of educated elites from the early modern period onwards. These literary elves were imagined as tiny, playful beings, with William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream a key development of this idea. In the 18th century, German Romantic writers were influenced by this notion of the elf and re-imported the Old English word elf into the German language. From the Romantic notion came the elves of modern popular culture. Christmas elves are a relatively recent creation, popularized during the late 19th century in the United States. Elves entered the 20th century high fantasy genre in the wake of J.R.R. Tolkien's work that repopularized the idea of elves as human-sized and human-like beings. Elves remain a prominent feature of fantasy media today. The earliest surviving manuscripts mentioning elves in any Germanic language are from Anglo-Saxon England. Medieval English evidence has therefore attracted quite extensive research and debate. In Old English, elves are often mentioned in medical texts, which attest to the belief that elves might inflict humans and livestock with illnesses. Apparently, mostly sharp internal pains and mental disorders. This tradition continues into later English speaking traditions also. Believes, Belief in elves has caused as a cause of illness remained prominent in early modern Scotland, where elves were viewed as supernaturally powerful people who lived invisibly alongside everyday rural people. Thus, elves were often mentioned in the early modern Scottish witchcraft trials. Many witnesses in the trials believed themselves to have been given healing powers or to know of people or animals made sick by elves. Throughout these sources, elves are sometimes associated with the succubus like supernatural being called the mare. More to come on that in a later episode. By the 14th century, they were also associated with the arcane practice of alchemy. Because of elves' association with illness, in the 20th century, most scholars imagine that elves in the Anglo Saxon tradition were small, invisible, demonic beings causing illnesses with arrows. This was encouraged by the idea that Elfshot is depicted in the Edowine Psalter in an image which became well known in this connection. However, this is now thought to be a misunderstanding. The image proves to be a conventional illustration of God's arrows and Christian demons. Rather, 21st century scholarship suggests that Anglo Saxon elves, like elves in Scandinavia or the Irish AOC, were regarded as people. Likewise, in Middle English and early Scottish evidence, while still appearing as causes of harm and danger, elves appear clearly as human-like beings. They become associated with medieval chivalric romance traditions of fairies, and particularly the idea of a fairy queen. A propensity to seduce peoples becomes increasingly prominent in the source material. Around the 15th century, evidence starts to appear for the belief that elves might steal human babies and replace them with changelings. There was a decline in the word elf by the end of the medieval period. Elf was increasingly being supplanted by the French loan word of fairy. An example is Geoffrey Chaucer's satirical tale of Sir Thopas, where a title character sets out in a quest for the elf queen who dwells in the country of the fairy. And that's it for today. Let me know if you guys all want more details on this. Any suggestions on which creatures I should cover next. And that's it for today. And I hope you guys enjoyed and have a good week.